Koalas are doing something scientists said was genetically impossible, and it could change everything we know about saving species from extinction. This is the story of how an animal hunted to the edge of oblivion, riddled with cancer-causing viruses, and left with almost no genetic diversity, is somehow writing its own genetic rescue, and in doing so, rewriting what scientists thought they knew about extinction. In March 2026, a team of researchers published a landmark study in the journal Science that sent shockwaves through the conservation world. They'd analyzed the whole genomes of 418 koalas from 27 populations across Australia, and what they found defied decades of conventional wisdom. Populations everyone assumed were genetically doomed were actually recovering, not because humans intervened with some breakthrough technology, but because the koalas were doing it themselves. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what happened to koalas in the first place. Before the late 1800s, roughly 10 million koalas lived across Australia. Then the fur trade arrived. Between 1888 and 1927, at least 8 million koalas were slaughtered for their pelts. 8 million. The killing didn't slow until the United States finally banned the import of koala fur in 1927. But by then, the damage was catastrophic. By the 1930s, koala populations had been completely wiped out across much of southern Australia. In the state of Victoria, the situation was especially dire. A handful of survivors, we're talking fewer than 24 animals in some cases, were moved to small islands like French Island, Phillip Island, and Kangaroo Island. The hope was simple: keep the species alive. And in raw numbers, it worked. Those island populations grew. Eventually, around 40,000 koalas were moved from those islands back to more than 250 sites across mainland Victoria. But here's the problem with saving a species from just a handful of individuals. You create what geneticists call a bottleneck. Every koala in Victoria descended from that tiny founding group, and that meant rampant inbreeding, low genetic diversity, and a population that, on paper, looked like it was on a genetic countdown to collapse. High rates of genetic deformity confirmed it. For decades, scientists pointed to Victorian koalas as a textbook example of inbreeding depression. And what happens when you lose too much genetic diversity? They were the cautionary tale. And then the 2026 study flipped the script. Dr. Colin Ahrens, the lead author and principal research scientist at Caesar Australia, and his colleagues discovered something no one expected. Those bottlenecked Victorian populations weren't collapsing, they were expanding. Over the past 40 generations, the effective population sizes, that's the number of individuals actually breeding and contributing genes to the next generation, had been climbing substantially, and that growth was driving something remarkable: an increase in recombination, the process by which DNA from two parents gets shuffled into new combinations in their offspring. More recombination meant more genetic variety. New mutations were accumulating. Harmful mutations were being purged. The koalas were generating the diversity they needed to adapt, not from some external source, but from within. As Ahrens put it, our findings tell a story of genetic recovery in these populations, not collapse. Now, here's where it gets really counterintuitive. The northern koala populations in Queensland and New South Wales, long considered the species' genetic stronghold, because they had higher diversity, were actually heading in the opposite direction. Their populations are shrinking due to habitat destruction, disease, and climate change. The devastating Black Summer bushfires of 2019 to 20 created additional pressure that helped trigger the genomic study. That shrinkage is eroding the very genetic diversity everyone assumed was their advantage. The populations everyone thought were safe are entering a bottleneck. The ones everyone thought were doomed are climbing out of one. This finding carries enormous implications for how we manage endangered species. For decades, conservation policy treated genetic diversity like a fixed scorecard. Low diversity meant high risk. End of story. But the koala data shows that diversity is dynamic. It changes over time, and the direction matters more than the snapshot. Caitlin Curry, a population geneticist at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, captured it well. If we give them the right resources and tools to have some kind of rapid expansion, maybe it also can restore their evolutionary potential. But the genetic bottleneck isn't the only battle koalas are fighting. There's something else lurking in their DNA, something that makes their recovery even more astonishing. It's called Koala Retrovirus, or KORV, and it's one of the strangest viruses in the natural world. KORV is most closely related to gibbon ape leukemia virus, or GALV, which infects primates, but somehow made the leap to marsupials. Unlike most retroviruses, KORV exists in both an exogenous form, meaning it spreads between individuals like a typical infection, and an endogenous form, meaning it has physically inserted itself into the koala genome. It's literally part of their DNA now, passed from parent to offspring. This invasion began somewhere between 22,000 and 49,000 years ago, and it's still happening today. The consequences are devastating. In northern Australia, 100% of koalas carry KORVA, the endogenous form. More pathogenic subtypes like KORVB predispose them to aggressive lymphomas and leukemias, immune suppression, and secondary diseases like chlamydia pecorum. A single koala genome contains at least 133 KORV integration sites, 133 places where this virus has stitched itself into the animal's genetic code. So, how do you fight a virus that's become part of you? Turns out the koalas had an unlikely ally already waiting inside their DNA. Millions of years before KORV showed up, another retrovirus had invaded the koala genome, a much older one called, short for phascolarctos, endogenous retroelement. Over millions of years, PR had become harmless, permanently stuck in the genome. But it hadn't become useless. Researchers at the Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research in Berlin discovered that PR was actively recombining with KORV, essentially swapping out the new virus's functional machinery and replacing it with its own degraded, harmless components. The result? Defective versions, called REC-CoRV, that can't replicate properly. Fear was sabotaging the invader from the inside. As Dr. Alfred Roca from the University of Illinois described it, it's as if these old viruses are saying to new viruses, "This is our territory, don't mess with it." And there's a beautiful logic to it. Fear's survival depends entirely on the koala's survival. If the host dies, so does fear. So this ancient virus, once an invader itself, has become a genomic sentinel, defending the very creature it parasitized millions of years ago. This matters beyond koalas. About 8% of the human genome is viral in origin, including genes essential for pregnancy like syncadin, remnants of ancient retroviral invasions. But in humans, the youngest known endogenous retroviruses are around 5 million years old. That makes it nearly impossible to study how they went from dangerous pathogens to the inert junk DNA most of them are today. Koalas are the only mammals where we can watch this process unfold in real time. They're a living laboratory for understanding a fundamental mechanism of evolution. Meanwhile, scientists aren't just watching. Professor Peter Timms at the University of the Sunshine Coast has been developing vaccines against KORV, and early trials showed a 79% reduction in viral load in vaccinated koalas. A 2025 study published in Cell revealed that koalas are also developing their own natural silencing mechanisms using small RNA molecules called piRNAs to shut down KORV expression at the genetic level. The koala's own genome is learning to muzzle the virus. None of this means koalas are out of danger. Complete neutralization of KORV will likely take hundreds of thousands of years. In 2022, koalas were uplisted to endangered in Queensland, New South Wales, and the ACT. Habitat loss, climate change, and disease remain existential threats. But the 2026 discovery tells us something profound. Genetic bottlenecks don't have to be death sentences. Given the chance to expand, given space, given time, given protection from the pressures that nearly destroyed them, populations can rebuild from almost nothing. DNA is not a static verdict. It's a living, evolving system, and it is far more resilient than we ever gave it credit for. As Colin Aaron said simply, I think this research has a message of hope, and maybe that's what matters most. Not just for koalas, but for every species on the brink, and for us, watching from the other side of the bottleneck, wondering if recovery is still possible. The koalas are showing us it is. Please like, share, comment. It will help this channel grow. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.